Jon is becoming a regular on the show. He was here last year. He was here a couple of years before that as well. Always great to talk to you, Jon. Jon holds the PMP and CTFL certification with experience in a myriad of product development topics, including process quality, cost improvement techniques. He's got 30 years of experience, or probably over 30 years. I don't know, under 30 years. I always miscount these days. Of product development experience ranging from embedded hardware and software through to verification, and with a number of patents outside the US. Jon has a Bachelor of Science degree in Electronic Engineering Technology from UNCC, an MBA in Marketing, and an MSc in Project Management for City University of Seattle. He's a member of SAE, Software Test Professional, AIAG, and PMI, holding the PMP certification. He has also co-authored about project management. Oh, Jon, well, show.
Thank you, Nigel. It's good to be here. It's very good to be here. And that list makes me seem kind of old, maybe.
Yeah, I know the feeling. And it's one of those things, isn't it? It's you sometimes sit back and look at what your career's been, and every so often I catch myself when I look at mine, I'll think, geez, that's a lot of stuff. My career will have been nearly 20 years now, and then I look at all the things I've done. And I was chatting to someone in the warehousing area for a while when I first joined, and he says, "How long is it since you left data warehouse?" And this person's been there, still there, and I'm like, "Well, about 18 years now." So, wow, seems like yes, but it's yeah. So, do you want to just tell us a little bit more about giving you that your blurb?
Okay, well. I'm a curious kind of person, as in I'm naturally curious, which is, I think, the reason why a lot of that looks like that. I'm also mission centric. When I get the bit between the teeth, I tend to go in that way. My wife tells me I'm either in or out. And that's fairly true. You know, if I'm in, you're getting everything. If I'm out, I don't really care how you want to do it. I'll follow your lead. I won't do anything. It'll be fine, whatever, you know. And so the things that I'm on about, I spend time learning and practicing, trying to understand why, how, what would, and that's what has driven my career a little bit. It's not been by some great. This is not the career I would have planned if I would have sat down and scripted what I want and like. I'm going to do this and then that, and then. In fact, it's about as far from what I would imagine I would like to have had for a career from what I actually have. But I'm content with what I have, but because apparently that must be what I wanted, because it's what is what I landed on. And it has given me the opportunity to do these things, to explore a lot of things. Like I was an embedded engineer. I wrote software, designed the hardware, and did some industrial applications, which was altogether an accident. I played in a band, and the drummer, the drummer's friend, Danny, was just finishing his engineering degree at North Carolina State, and he was telling Harold about it, and I was there. And I'm like, well, that sounds kind of cool. I'm probably never going to make it as a heavy metal bass player. I try to emulate Steve Harris, but I'm not going to be that guy, you know? So I thought I could be an engineer and I could design effects pedals. So it was the reason for me being an engineer is totally unscripted. It was an accident. As a kid, I wanted to be everything from a person who designed motors to a marine biologist to a doctor. And I mean, you know, it's whatever takes my interest. Well, the engineering thing kind of took my interest, even without the music involved, right? It turns out I have a little bit of a talent for it, probably because of the mathematics and the mathematics of music to some degree. There's probably some pieces. And so my career has not been a script. It's been, oh yeah, that looks like fun. Let's go explore that. Oh, that might be cool. I think I'll do that. Oh, you pay me to get an extra degree. Well, I like the front end I like product development, and the front end, which is what does the customer want, and delivering it, marketing, might be a thing that would go good with this, because it would help me understand the upfront work and the part that gets delivered to the customer. And similarly so for the Master of Science in Project Management. You know, the company paid for a master's. If I could keep my grade up, then I could keep my job. I'm like, you know what? I think I'll give this a crack, because it doesn't matter how good an engineer you are. It doesn't matter how good the business case is. If you can't deliver it on time and on target, project management skills, it's still gonna be a failure. So all these things, in my view, are connected. And my whole career has been like that. What little thing about product development do I not know that's kind of interesting that maybe somebody should know?
It's been your custom skills, isn't there? That there's that sweet spot, delivering a project and delivering business. Sometimes there's we'll stay in our lane a little bit too much.
Yeah.
And kind of go, well, I'm doing that, and not step back or step across and get that bit of experience. I think my career has been one that I've quite often, I've been quite serious. And one area that I haven't done is gone and done service. And it's one weakness I have in my sort of kit bag, that I haven't been on that side, but I've seen from the outside, and I've been kicked when I broke something, or I've been told to get stuffed when I want to try and put something in live and I'm not ready. But I've not experienced what those guys do on a day-to-day basis, on the way that they're looking different, because it's a slightly different mindset. And it's something that I think all of us would do in the project management community when looking at how you're doing streams that you're delivering for or delivering through, being able to get some experience in some organizations do that. So you don't want to, if you've got somebody who's brilliant in marketing, sticking them into project management for 6 months means you haven't got that brilliant marketeer. But then what you do get is a much more empathetic marketeer when you've got them back into marketing. And same with project managers, same with engineers, etc. It's that it's difficult, but you can see where the benefit is if you've had that little bit of experience somewhere else.
Yeah, it does. And for me, another value is, if you're managing a project and you have had some of these roles, you know some of the questions you should be asking, or you studied these areas, you know some of the questions you should be asking of them. And more importantly, you might have some idea of the metrics to add some, you don't have to be a project manager and burn your hand on I'm 30% complete. And then come the day it's deliverable, you find out that person's only got about 10% of it done. You don't have to do that too many times to realize I really need something more than your gut telling me where we are, and that helps with these experiences, can help you with, okay, how are we gonna ascertain where you not delude ourselves? I know you wouldn't lie to me, but you might be a little optimistic, and you might have some optimism bias, and there's some self-preservation in all these things. So we probably need to find some objective way to find out where we are, and not just gut feel. Some things matter more than others in this regard, though. And
I think it's good. Actually, this the way we're talking now, it kind of leads into the topic we wanted to trying to talk about. Every topic. Those watching it is the one behind.
It must be a UK thing, probably.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, it's funny actually. My daughters have said to me before, "Now I'm so funny, I should be a project manager." So it's been said to me. So risk management, right? Okay, so what I think, and some of the why bother? Why bother? What's the point of? Because actually, you can't get something really. You can't guess all the risks, so you're always going to get caught by something. In my experience, so therefore you might as well not bother and just accept it. Be agile, because we're meant to be agile now, and take the changes when you need to, and take things and be agile on it, and just get on with it. There's an argumentative start to it.
But you depends. That might be the exact thing you should do. It's going to depend on what it is you're working on. If you want to take, we could take that attitude if we're building an online video game that there's no material cost, there's no login credentials, you're not getting anybody's password, nobody's social security number, nothing from a bank account. You can probably have a little bit of a flippant attitude about how you want to go about the risk, or because the consequences are fairly benign. But if you're building airplanes and self-driving cars and things like that, where the investments are high, the material costs can be high, the tooling can be awful. The consequences of failure in the field are not so simple. People could get injured. Then you probably need to adopt a different approach. And you're right about this. You cannot pick. You're not going to find every possible risk. More importantly, the combination of things that are going to lead to some kind of problem. If you watch aircraft disasters, you'll notice that it's very seldom one thing that causes things to hit the fan, proverbially hit the fan, as we say. It's this plus one or two other things that seem like not much, but stacked up together, it leads to something not great. And some of those you can't predict. I'm sorry.
The perfect storm scenario, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's the law of sod, where you get the thing really hammer you is where you get three of things happening at once, and someone's three.
And they interact. Yeah. So I just had a poll on LinkedIn. I put a poll on LinkedIn asking people about the risk register. One of the answers was, yes, we create a risk register. The second was, we create a risk register and we track. And one of the other answers was, we just adapt. And I was curious. I didn't get an answer to this yet. I need to set up a separate poll behind it. I was wondering if the just adapt are only agile practitioners in regard to the attitude you were talking at the earlier for this. But for me, like you also said earlier, that it's actually, you really need two approaches for the things that you can kind of predict, or that you might have experienced before. Or you might just sit down and run some kind of scenario in your mind with the team, and you come away with, okay, this could happen. In fact, it's maybe probable, and this would be the outcome. And so how would I know it's coming? You could put this in your risk register, but there's going to be some that are going to be emergent, and you're not going to know until you start seeing the symptom, maybe. And you're just going to have a culture, I think, that's going to have people bring this to the fore immediately, rather than, I'm not sure it's a problem just yet. Waiting on a problem to become a problem, that's not a project management thing. That's I don't know what that is, but that's not a success thing either.
Yeah, it's interesting. In the middle of it, I'm busy. It might not. Right, I'll put that to next.
Yeah.
And then next week, it's on fire because of that thing.
Yeah.
It kind of sounds like a little where we have, and the risk, I love risk registers. I think that risk logs and risk registers are brilliant. I love the way people fill them in and then think they're not in trouble if it goes wrong.
Yeah.
And I find somewhere where people say, and then you have a team chasing people up to say you haven't updated the risk register. And that, for me, it's the wrong question. The question is, what are you doing to mitigate the risk? Even if you haven't written the data to register, because updating the register doesn't mean that you've got a decent plan to mitigate that risk. Manage it, insure it, whatever, whatever method you decide you're going to do to deal with it.
Yeah.
I think the problem with risk registers is people think that's the end of the risk reporting sometimes.
Yeah, it's a book that goes in a desk drawer, and that's probably the end of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or the thing is people are managing it, and they are managing that risk. And they've on a day-to-day basis, they're dealing again that the person to manage the risk. They're just so. In which case, change your tooling to help them manage the risk. Then, by default, gather the data that needed for reporting. So you end up doing and I see this a lot in the project management tooling arena. From my point of view, there's lots of focus on being able to report up. And report how the overall project's doing, how to get your team to report on how they're doing on the code. But it's not a lot of focus on actually making the thing that we are doing easier and gather the data as part of making it easier. I don't know whether AI is going to bring us some into that and start helping with that. I see it.
I think
it's years I've seen it.
I think if you're if your risk register has more than just the name of the thing and the symptom for the thing, but you've also managed to connect some metric associated with it where you could use that as a prediction, but then you have to, that provides a baseline for the person who's going to be monitoring this thing to compare it. Now, the next challenge, of course, is like you say, I need to find a measurement to compare that thing to. But if I specify the measurement, I should have a way of an idea of how to collect that. Where do I need to go to look for this? I'll give you an example. I outsourced some work to a project, to a supplier. Now, you could argue that I have just done something with my risk. I transferred it to the supplier. But the reality is if the supplier fails, my project still fails. So I kind of transferred it to it, but I'm still going to eat it if something goes wrong. So maybe I think lateness is a problem. So I would ask them to, I would want to see a tracking Gantt chart, and I wanted to see their schedule performance index. And I would have an idea of what the variation I can live with is based on my overall project schedule and how much slack and whatever is supposed in there. So I would say, you who's tracking the project schedule, which is probably the supplier interface, which would probably be the project manager, I expect to see from my supplier a schedule performance update once every N amount of time. And as long as it's within the variance, say it's 1.05 to 0.95 or 1.1 to 0.9, as long as I'm operating in that zone, I'm confident that the outcome is going to be okay. Now, it's all predicated on the belief that the supplier has the stuff to support these sorts of things in the background. So you'd have to check that out. But that's just an example of, I transferred it, but I have a metric now, which is the schedule performance, to see if they're actually going to hit my target. And if they're not, I can use those numbers to predict what actually might happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. It's again,
Yeah.
in a sort of summary, what is a risk?
It's a potentiality, right? It's and they have dimensions to them, and they have dimensions that are based on an organization's or an individual's preference. An individual can be risk tolerant, and they'll go to bet up, put all their money in the stock market, and wipe their hands together and say, "I'm good." And if they lose it, meh. Other people are not going to do that. It's got the dimension of the probability of an event happening. It's got the dimension of what is the consequence of should that come to pass. Am I losing money? Am I outside? Is my reputation of my company destroyed? You know, those sorts of things. Have I done harm in the real world with my plane that just fell out of the sky, or a door that landed on somebody's head somewhere because the door didn't stay affixed to the plane? Those are sort of the dimensions. We talked a little bit about that earlier. The level of risk tolerance is going to be one of those factors. If I'm building a video game that is asking for nothing personal, and the server doesn't work, okay, well, you're not playing PlanetSide today. Go out there and do something else, you know. But if you're building ABS systems or self-driving vehicle parts systems, subsystems, that's going to be a different attitude.
There are project risks that are risks that there's a risk that the developer, not necessarily the output that you're producing, but just the time. And it's always, that's a timeline one. But where do you, and I think there's a hard answer for this, but well, that's a problem. That's part of project management scheduling. It's part of sourcing. It's part of something that happens as normal within a project. And you wouldn't log that in that minutiae and lead you down at that risk level. So where do you draw that level on that risk management, kind of where you go from it's day-to-day dealing with stuff, and it's issue management with a little I rather than issue with a big I, which I see as kind of risks that have turned into issues that now you've got to solve. It's kind of these ones that down here, they're just the minutiae, they're doing stuff, they're getting shit done on a project is how I kind of see it.
Yeah.
How do you see that as leveling that in that sort of, and I'm guessing it's a continuum of some sort, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Problem. it's like you said, three things. You could have one problem with a resource developer being there or an engineer, but actually there's a risk of another one. And if you have five of them that are off, that means the whole project's 6 months down because you've got to hit certain dates for facing with something else and that's that. But where does that aggregation come up? How do you see that?
Yeah, that's part of that whole prioritization thing. But let's talk a little bit about schedule, because in the schedule thing you just outlined there's no risk there. You're going to be late. If you have no slack in your schedule and the developer can't be out for a day or two because he's sick, and you're going to miss your schedule, if you're a project manager, you should just come to grips with the fact that this thing ain't going to, the probability of this hitting a schedule is going to be pretty small. And I would articulate that to everybody above me and that's expecting this thing to come out. And I have in the past, as a testing manager, testing group manager, I had a project manager come to me and say, this is what's going to happen. You're going to get the vehicle and you're going to start your integration test. It's going to come here on whatever day, and you're going to start the integration work on the very next day. But I had been keeping track of when we get a vehicle from this part of the company, you can't just start testing it because let's say it's supposed to be a 2013 model. Well, when we get a vehicle from that part of the company, what you have is the driveline is a 2013. The brakes are from 2007. All the interior parts, all the other components, the instrument cluster might be at who knows what year. So you can't start testing it. So I showed him this little curve. I said, it will either be 2 days or it'll be 16 days, but it's not going to be the next day. I mean, if you wanted to pick 8, showing him the curve, I said, if you pick a week, you have a 50-50 chance of getting that right. The real point is, if you don't have slack, and that's the schedule that I was just talking about, there was no slack. If you don't have slack, you should just plan on being late, and you should tell everybody that's listening, okay, this is what we're trying to do. Know that the probability of making this happen is going to be pretty small. And if that's a problem, then you probably need to start figuring a solution even before you even put the schedule together. As you're putting the schedule together, you need to be thinking alternative plans to try and figure a way to compress it or push it out the other way. But at a large scale, what matters is going to depend on what you're working on and what the priorities are. Which ones of these are the most damning? You just got to kind of work through your team and figure that out. Sometimes historical record helps. You can look at the variation of what's happened in the past. You can look at how you've done things in the past and what you saw as a failure or a success, and maybe model some of those if applicable. You really have to kind of get the diversity of perspectives in looking at these. If it's relegated to the PM alone, it's going to be rough.
Yeah, and I think that whole thing about it was kind of a bit of a facetious. It doesn't matter what you do, you risk register to escalate up because they're being dealt with. But then when someone goes, why didn't you have that on the risk? And it's kind of, well, it wasn't, I didn't see it as being a risk. I saw it as being a problem. I just needed to deal with it. If I read, I would, I'm doing it. So, and you get it wrong sometimes, don't you?
Yeah. I like using scenario based, thinking about what the failure could be. And a lot of that's going to be based on history. Now, the reason I came to that, when that PM came to me with the problem, you're going to jump on this truck, your team's going to jump on this truck tomorrow and start testing it. I'm like, no, because I've already played this out. I've looked at what's happened over the past, and I can already tell you this scenario. You have a slim and none chance of getting this right, and slim is dead, as my Irish friends used to tell me.
But yeah, so we're at that point then. I'm just looking at your list of items that you said. Talk to me about pre-mortem. What the heck is pre-mortem?
This is interesting. I started doing this. I teach PMP classes, or I have in the past, probably more than a decade ago. And as part of my own edification, I took an Ishikawa diagram, which is generally used for manufacturing problems. And it's got man, machine, material, and things like that, usually M's. And it's 5, I think, 5 M's go on it. And I thought, let me think about project management. And I took an Ishikawa diagram and I made it 10 bones to cover the 10 knowledge management areas out of PMI for whatever year that was. And then I thought, okay, so now I'm going to say I have, if you're familiar with Ishikawa, it's a root cause analysis exploration, usually. In this case, we're not going to use it as a root cause necessarily. We're going to use it more for a thinking how things can fail. So at the head, we're not going to put a particular failure symptom we've seen. We're going to put something we think could happen to our project. For example, schedule failure. And I went through the fishbone and I said, okay, can quality make my schedule late? Sure, there's a whole bunch of things in quality. Human resources too. Procurement can make my schedule late. Matter of fact, I've seen procurement make a schedule late very frequently. You don't even start on time, so you're bound to finish late. So you end up finding out that these are all kind of gears that intermesh together. And so I started using this in these classes, and we could maybe figure out how to do that for one of your events if you'd like, where we can walk through it with some people on board and demonstrate this concept. I didn't think much of it, but I had a professor at a local university contact with me because they were teaching their project management class something about quality, and it was going to Six Sigma. Somebody else did the course for them, and they're like, I don't know that they need to have Six Sigma for entry project management quality. I'm like, no, I don't think so either. And I showed them this, and they were all gung-ho. I think they took it. And I had another discussion with somebody else about this, and they're like, this is very unique. So now I'm like, that's why I put it on here, because I'm like, it is in fact in the book, but I didn't think anything of it. I just thought, I learned from it, and my students that I walked through seem to learn something from it. So eventually, when you connect this to the pre-mortem in this regard is I have a symptom. The symptom is I'm over budget or whatever. And then I would go through the knowledge management areas. What things in project management can make me go over budget? If I haven't spent sufficient time decomposing my product or what I'm trying to do, no work breakdown structure at a time when I actually need one. So the scope's not very clear. I don't have a very good controls on my scope, could be a problem. My estimates are poor because they're top down, so it's the timing issues a problem. Can make me go over cost. I don't have the right competencies in my human resource and talent section. That can make me late because the guy who can do it in a day, I don't have him. I have the guy who can do it in 2 weeks. That's going to have an impact. I mean, if you go through this, you'll find that all these little things can hit. Some are more likely than others, and those might be the places where you need to pay attention to. In the case of the scope, you want to make sure that you have good controls over, you make sure you have it elicited as clearly as you can at the very beginning, recognizing that things are going to change, and that everybody is aware of a change management process for the scope, including the customer and your development team. So you can kind of make sure, create a checklist against these things to kind of answer this eventuality or this possibility.
Looking to the end of your project and going, it's broke. Why is it broke?
Yeah.
This is broke. This is broken on it. Yeah.
It's like a scenario based.
I've seen since I've had with people talk about doing it kind of in a positive, successfully delivered the project. It's there. It's in there. Everyone, we're on budget. We're on time. Everyone's absolutely.
Yeah.
What stopped us doing that? And it's if we were someone who wanted to stop that, we stop it.
Yeah.
Let's put on our nefarious Machiavelli hat and go, right, you don't want to see that. You don't want to see that other version of yourself succeed in that project. So how can you do it? You're the stakeholder who don't want to. How can we do it? And that's another way you can kind of find those risks, can't you?
Yeah. That leads us to that's a pretty good segue to the other thing. For me, okay, PMI, I'm about to speak some heresy or some blasphemy here, but it is what it is. PMI suggests that there are two dimensions to risks. There's the negative parts, and there's they call it opportunities. And you'll notice in that brief little list I sent you, am I at risk of winning the lottery? I don't really call that a risk. No, and for me, that takes a whole different mindset.
I think the risk of winning, I try to make sure people have got something. And I say, right, just in case there's a random bus tonight, and I changed it because I didn't want to tempt fans. So just in case we all win the lottery tonight, yeah, if I win the lottery, I'm not coming back. So just in case that happens, let's make sure we've got cover. Let's make sure.
Okay. Now
that it can be a risk, but it's
that's the risk. Yeah, that's the approach I can get behind. What you just said, I'm with you, because that is in fact a risk. But when you're talking about capitalizing on opportunities, that's not the mindset you want for your risk. You want a naysayer in there. You need to have a little bit of doom and gloom, and then you can sort out what is true and valid or real out of this accordingly. But you want to get as many of the things that somebody in your team can see go wrong, and more importantly, you want to set an atmosphere where they feel like it's okay to do that. Not one where I see something bad can happen, but I don't want to get branded a naysayer or a obstructionist or an Eeyore or whatever. So I'm going to keep my mouth closed. And then the crap hits the fan, and that person's just sitting there going, I knew it. And that's not helpful for anybody.
In the danger of how do we kill this?
Yeah.
What you and you can say silly ideas. Yeah.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, meteor strike is going to kill the project. Yeah. That's how we could kill this project.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. That'd solve them. And once you start getting some of those in, the things that you're talking about, where the naysayers being there, it becomes part of the doomsday scenarios that are fun doomsday scenarios to chat about being daft. But then that allows that open door for them to do that without risk of feeling like they're the doomsayer, because we're going for doomsday prophecies, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. You really need that. And what you just described, every one of the patents, I'm going to say every one, it's over a pretty good number of years, so it may not exactly be true, but it's probably 95% true, or maybe even higher, maybe 100%, is this. They start with a kernel of somebody saying they're dissatisfied with something or a technical hurdle that needs to be accomplished. And then people start talking about it, probably informally, and these new things come up organically. That's the thing. That's where the diversity is the big deal. You start getting these other perspectives into these discussions, and you start, the pieces that you are missing, they fill in, or the pieces that you have right and they have wrong, you start to understand which one of these things is more valid because of circumstances. And it's the same with the risk. You need to have that ability to kind of blurt. And if it's kind of dumb what you're saying, it's not going to cost you anything. It may cost a little bit of joking, but it should be in good fun, like you said here. Not the kind of thing that would terminate your participation with the future.
You want to be able to open that for someone to be able to say that. Everyone else go, oh, blooming, that's a bit doomsday. That's unlikely, isn't it? One person going to go, yeah, but it could happen, I suppose, couldn't it?
Yeah.
And because you were all looking at that with a different lens, then everyone goes, well, it could. What would we do about that then? Well, let's talk about that a bit more. And then it becomes a topic, a subject to discuss.
Yeah. It turns out you can't do anything about it. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and the likelihood is really low, but you could potentially be ready for it.
Yeah.
Just think, like, obviously, we talked at the top of the show that you've got this book, your new book, and I was thinking there's got to be 5, 6 books on risk management out there. Yeah, there's bound to be 5 or 6 of them on that you can get.
Yeah.
Why write another one? And what are people get out of your book? Maybe give us a little talk through kind of what's in there and how someone would, your little differentiate, your USP as your product man as well.
Yeah. Well, most of them talk about the risk management processes, and I don't think you can't go too far down here without understanding the sequence of things, identifying, doing some kind of assessment, prioritizing things, putting some kind of controlling actions. The difference is not many put a focus on metrics, which are going to be the thing that tells us, is this thing imminent or is it nothing at all to worry about? The other thing is I've not seen too many risk books that go into the corporate culture that impacts your attitude about risk. Some of the things we just talked about, that also talk about some of the biases that lead us to some conclusions that are kind of end up in very unpleasant situations. Optimism bias, for example, that's just a quick one. There's a lot of those that can end up in that can put us in a bad place because we weren't paying attention to these things. So it's culture, it's the individual biases. This book also goes into, besides the risk management processes, it goes into practices, Department of Energy practices, automotive practices to reduce risk or to address these risky things, and OSHA kind of actions and security things from IT. It has here's practices in these industries. And so if you find yourself like in your automotive industry and you're now messing with vehicles that are connected to telemetry systems that are connected to the world, and cybersecurity is a thing in vehicles, so you can go over there and take a look at, okay, so how does cybersecurity handled for my automotive? If you're in aerospace and you want to adopt some some automotive practices, which might be prudent, I don't know, somebody else would have to make that, then you would learn some things from those as well. So it's not just the processes we go through here, it's all the underlying things, a good number of the underlying things you're going to need in place to be effective risk management. Everything from the metrics and historical record, how to set up so you have a historical record, the problems with measuring things from the individual and from the tools that you use to measure, biases, all these things are going to have an impact on how competent our risk management is.
Industries. And I don't think I've ever sat there consciously. What is the organizational? I have done is when I've been in some organizations, they are more risk averse than maybe one of my other projects. And I've been cognizant that some projects I've run been a lot more risk averse. Been less risk averse than other projects I've run. But I may be doing this. And maybe everyone else is, and I mean, well, not. But it struck me there as kind of at the beginning of your project, whilst doing that risk management, having a conversation about what is our risk appetite on this product, this system that we're on, or on this end customer experience we might be delivering. The gaming thing you were talking about before. How and I don't know whether you cover that in it, but how do you think about that sort of thing when you're in this situation with your studying these projects? And say to someone like, right, okay, the risk management tools, you know how to do that. It's quite hard, but actually, how do you? Before that, you need to understand where your boundaries are on your risk appetite. How do you do it?
Yeah.
What do you do?
There's a couple of things. The first thing is your strategy selection. Okay, wait a minute. Let's start with the boundaries, because that probably matters first. You sort of have to know I call it boundary spanning. You sort of have to know the areas internal and external that could probably go wrong or have a chance of going wrong that would produce an outcome you don't like. And for internal, this may be not so difficult if you have some historical record, or what do they call it? Institutional knowledge of the company. For example, I know for a fact where this happens, and then that always, I'm never able to test the truck the next day. It's going to have to be N number of days, up to 16 days, before it's suitable to be a device to put under test, for example. So some of those things, those scenarios that we've already experienced, are going to help us figure out internally and externally what those boundaries can look like. Legal things change, like regulatory requirements that are up in the air until the last couple of weeks before it's supposed to be in place. Some emissions things happen like that. The government gets involved, and they're still trying to figure out, is it A or should it be B? And when your design should essentially be complete, you're still waiting for them to figure this out, so you can't complete the design. So those things, as you experience those, they should go in your register. But here's a good one: the strategy we select is also going to have an impact. For example, there was one of these emissions projects in a company I worked at, a vehicle company, and there were two ways to accomplish this objective. One was to add a new electronic control unit and manage the communications between this new thing and the existing vehicle architecture. That's one thing I have to fix, and some communication between it and some other pieces. There was another solution which required gutting essentially the architecture from a communication standpoint and reworking it to the tune of about 80%, maybe more, to match something else. So that now there was a benefit to this. It now meant that instead of having two platforms, I only had one platform. So there was some long-term benefit to this, but there's a big difference between getting one thing right, electronic control unit right, versus whole-scale communications change in my vehicle. That's everything has to have to change. And you're up against a ticking clock that when, January 1 comes rolling around, you're expected to be putting out a particular vehicle to meet this regulatory requirement, legal thing. And so the company could have picked this or that. Want to guess which one they picked? That's exactly what they did. And guess what? They were not shipping vehicles January 1st. And now it might have been worth the gamble. I don't know. I couldn't see that high up into the organization. Maybe the benefit was there, but it seemed to summarily dismiss, let's just add this and create a whole separate project to actually manage this change that matters differently from a timeline, because that's more like a development project, and the time on a development project can be like this, it fluctuates. But the time on developing an individual component is going to be a lot tighter. In other words, you have a lot more control over that.
Yeah, it's interesting because you can look at those things. In hindsight's great in it, but you can look at that and maybe budget's a different thing, but you can sit there and go, well, okay, the optimal is build the proper thing that we've got the reuse, we've got the longer term benefits. So that's great. What's the contingent cost of doing the other work? And then that means you can still ship vehicles if it doesn't happen. And then is it cost benefit? Because you duplicate cost, don't you? And at closing, coming towards the end of the call anyway, off really, John. Thank you for your patience waiting. Was that today that you'd like to get over to the team, or maybe there's a single nugget for people when they're thinking about risk management, other than buy your book, what they should think about maybe?
Yeah. I'd say spend some time up front, even before you start in that strategy selection. Spend some time weighing alternatives. And if you're not the person that's responsible for those, actually weighing those, because sometimes project managers are not, some executives do that, and then you get your marching orders. In some companies, that's how it works. This is what we're going to do. At least push back a little bit to let them know if there's some other strategy or some reasons the strategy might not be the best. Help coach them through that, coach upward in this case, because they probably don't know. And then the next thing I'd say is do some scenario work. Spend some time with your team working out scenarios of things that can go wrong. Use a pre-mortem. You don't have to use the Ishikawa, but do some kind of thinking about what can go wrong. Look at your historical record. If you don't have a historical record, but you got plenty of people on your team with experience within your organization or even outside, let's listen to that. Let's get that on deck, and then figure out which ones of those are the most egregious, and find some metrics to track these things, or find some ways to get rid of them altogether if you can. It happens long before we start doing the work. Your project risk management should ideally start long before you do the work, but don't let it stop at the beginning either. Emergent things happen, so just make it part of your ritual. Besides this upfront work, just make it part of your cadence of your project, and set a tone so your team members will bring you stuff before it's a trauma. Hey, we got a risk. Oh no, what you're describing right now seems to be an actual problem, not a potential problem.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it is a case of, I know with we had risk management systems at one time where we encouraged our teams to put risks in and they didn't, and partially because I don't think the way that we did it, and I love the idea of that continuity of not just doing the update the risk register, which, as you can tell, I don't have a lot of time for, but actually, you've got little things firing out of my head on there, and the idea of doing that pre-mortem and doing that pre-mortem activity when you've got a long-running piece of work to do it regular, but also have that as part of your, if you're doing daily stand-ups, if you're doing weekly calls or whatever, as part of that, not go through, right, let's review our risks, let's have a look what we've written in it. Not that crap. It's kind of, what else can stop us? What have we found that might stop us? What might stop us? What might stop us? And have that sort of in playing football or soccer or anything like that, you kind of think of it and think that all the way through a game of soccer, the team are watching to see what's the risk of the goal of someone getting to a position that may meet that they can get the goal, and they're trying to get it, and they're calling to their colleagues to go and deal with it. And I don't think we encourage that kind of basis within projects, and we could do. And that kind of being able to drop in and go, I've spotted time. Great.
Yeah, more of an ongoing attitude toward it. Yeah.
It is that, and the same with everything projects. We then move to get stuff done and tick off it's done, which doesn't always help us. As I say, thank you so much for coming on the show. If people want to get a hold of the book, want to get in touch with you, want to find out more about you and what you do, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, connect with me on LinkedIn, Jon M Quigley on LinkedIn. You can send me an email at jon.quigley@valuetransform.com. The book is on Amazon, so you can get it there.
Cool.
That should do it.
Brilliant.
Okie dokie. Thanks for having me on, Nigel.
Okay, you're the first one there. Thanks, my friend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you. Later, brother.